Good morning, dear students. Today we shall begin with the fifth part of the chapter, Demand. In the last class, you had studied about law of demand, its assumptions and its exceptions. Along with it, you also studied about few reasons as to why demand curve slopes downward. But in case of exceptions, you saw that the demand curve slopes upward because there is a positive relationship between the price and quantity demanded. Whenever the price is high, quantity demanded is more in case of exceptions only. So the topic for today is movement along the demand curve, change in quantity demanded. Now there are two types of change that we see in this chapter, demand. The first one is movement along the demand curve, and the second one is shift in demand curve. So these are the two types of changes in demand curve that take place. So today we shall study about movement along the demand curve only, and it is also known as change in quantity demanded. So let us begin. When quantity demanded of a commodity changes due to change in its price, keeping other factors constant, it is known as change in quantity demanded. So in law of demand also we have studied that there is a direct inverse relationship between price and quantity demanded, keeping all the other factors constant. So this movement along the demand curve topic deals with this particular relationship between price and quantity demanded, and they are considering that all the other factors are going to remain constant, and this change that takes place, the change in quantity demanded, is to be dealt in this topic. So it is graphically expressed as movement along the same demand curve. So this is very important. For movements to be shown, there is only one demand curve, and the movements are shown with the help of arrows. Okay, so it can either be an upward movement or it can be a downward movement, but only one demand curve is to be made and movements are shown on that same demand curve. So there can either be a downward movement, that is expansion in demand. So whenever there is a downward movement, it is going to show you an expansion in demand, or an upward movement, which is contraction in demand along the same demand curve. It is very important, only one demand curve is to be made. So over here there is this graph towards your left which shows the movements along the demand curve. On the demand curve there is one point A which is in the middle, and there are two types of movement. One is upward movement, that is from point A to point C, and another movement is downward movement from point A to point B. So these two movements are shown in this graph. So let us read. Upward movement: when price rises to OP2, quantity demanded falls to OQ2, known as contraction in demand, leading to an upward movement from A to C along the same demand curve. So over here there is a change in price from OP to OP2, and you have already seen that whenever there is a rise in price, there will be a fall in quantity demanded. As a result, quantity demanded decreases from OQ to OQ2. As a result, the demand curve shows an upward movement from point A to point C. Okay, and demand curve over here is denoted by DD. Double D is there. Okay, so there is another type of movement. So downward movement. On the other hand, fall in price from OP to OP1 leads to an increase in quantity demanded from OQ to OQ1, known as expansion in demand, resulting a downward movement from A to B along the same demand curve DD. So another type of movement is also shown over here, as we just saw. So whenever there is a fall in price, fall as in from OP to OP1, that is the fall. So whenever there is a fall in price, we have already studied in law of demand that there will be increase in quantity demanded. So with fall in price, quantity demanded increases from OQ to OQ1, which leads to downward movement of demand curve from point A to point B. So this is very important. Both the movements have been shown in the same graph over here. So let us study about expansion in demand. Expansion in demand refers to a rise in quantity demanded due to a fall in price of commodity, other factors remaining constant. So over here they have said that expansion in demand refers to rise in quantity demanded, and whenever there is a rise in quantity demanded, it means that there is a fall in price of commodity, because we are considering all the other factors to be the same. It is going to be constant. So it leads to downward movement along the same demand curve. So whenever there is an expansion in demand, there will be a downward movement. It is also known as extension in demand or increase in quantity demanded. So there are few other names which you need to remember. Along with expansion in demand, it is also known as extension in demand or increase in quantity demanded. So over here there is a schedule and a graph along with its description, which is going to show you how this expansion in demand takes place. So coming to schedule, there are two columns, price and demand. When the price is rupees 20, demand is 100 units. When price decreases to rupees 15, demand rises to 150 units. Okay, so over here in this graph there is a downward movement. From point A, the demand has expanded to point B. Always remember to make this arrow. The arrow is going to show the direction of movement. So it is very important to make the arrow. So as shown in the above graph, quantity demanded rises from 100 units to 150 units with a fall in price from rupees 20 to rupees 15, resulting in a downward movement from A to B along the same demand curve DD. Okay, so this is the description that we have just now discussed. The second type of movement is contraction in demand. Contraction in demand refers to a fall in quantity demanded due to rise in price of commodity, other factors remaining constant. So since there is a negative relationship between price and quantity demanded, a fall in quantity demanded is a effect of rise in price of a commodity, because we are considering all the other factors to be constant. So it leads to an upward movement along the same demand curve, and it is also known as decrease in quantity demanded. So you need to remember the other name of contraction in demand, that is decrease in quantity demanded. Again, there is a schedule and a graph along with description. So the schedule has got two columns, one for price and the other for demand. When price is rupees 20, demand is for 100 units. When price increases to rupees 25, demand decreases to 70. The same has been reflected over here in this graph. Now these dotted lines are showing the change that has taken place. Okay, so from point A there is an upward movement to point B. As shown in the above graph, quantity demanded falls from 100 units to 70 units with a rise in price from rupees 20 to rupees 25, resulting in an upward movement from A to B along the same demand curve dt. So this was about contraction in demand. So today we have studied about change in quantity demanded, which occurs due to change in price, and we consider that all the other factors are constant. So this change in price leads to movement along the demand curve. There are two types of movement, either downward movement or upward movement. Downward movement is also known as expansion movement or expansion in demand, which happens due to decrease in price, and upward movement is also known as contraction in demand, which takes place due to increase in price. So that is it for today. These are a few assignment questions. The first one is about your application of knowledge. You need to apply your knowledge, whatever you have studied till now. First and second questions are very easy. You just need to think hard. And the third one is just a direct question. Explain the meaning of change in quantity demanded. How does it affect demand curve? So you need to answer all these questions. So that is it for today's class. In the next class, we shall study about shift in demand curve. There are two types of shift, either rightward or leftward. So we are going to study about that. So that is it for today's class. Thank you.